My husband thought parading his pregnant mistress at our 10th anniversary gala was his crowning achievement. He believed her swelling belly guaranteed his legacy while I remained the barren, useful idiot at home. But as I clutched the cold crystal glass in the shadows, I knew a medical secret he had erased from his memory. Marcus was sterile. That child was not his heir, but the spark I would use to burn his stolen empire to ash. My name is Elena Vance. I stood in the center of the master bathroom in our Manhattan penthouse, a space so vast and clinically white that it felt more like a museum than a home. The imported Italian marble was cold beneath my bare feet. My hands shook violently as I held up the small plastic stick, two distinct pink lines. I stared at them until my vision blurred. It was the result of the last viable embryo, the product of a final, desperate round of in vitro fertilization I had undergone in secret. I whispered to the silence of the empty room. Finally. Oh, God, finally. I closed my eyes and let the memory of us wash over me. 10 years. That was how long I had been married to Marcus Sterling. I could still smell the grease and stale coffee of the drafty garage in Queens where we started. Back then, we ate instant noodles while he coded, and I managed the logistics for what would eventually become BioCore. In those days, his hands were stained with ink, but they held mine with a warmth that could melt the harshest winter. Now, he was a billionaire CEO. The warmth was gone, replaced by the icy precision of a man who measured life in stock prices and hostile takeovers. He had become a stranger who wore my husband's face. Today marked our 10th wedding anniversary. I had foolishly expected a dinner, perhaps a quiet evening at the small Italian bistro where he proposed. Instead, my phone had buzzed earlier that afternoon with a sterile message from him. It read simply, "Big launch at the plaza tonight. Don't wait up." It's just dry business talk, Elena. You'd be bored. Just business. That was all we were now, a merger that had lost its strategic value. But I looked at the pregnancy test again. This changed everything. This was the bridge back to the man I married. I would not stay home and wait for him to return in the early hours of the morning. I walked into the walk-in closet and pulled out a long black gown. It was silk, elegant, and understated. It was perfect for fading into the background until the right moment. The invitation lying on Marcus's desk said, "Masquerade." I found a Venetian mask, intricate and laced with silver filigree. It would cover the upper half of my face. I needed the anonymity. I wanted to observe him before I revealed myself. I placed the positive test and the initial ultrasound printout into a small velvet box. I tied a silver ribbon around it with trembling fingers. "Please, let this be enough," I murmured to my reflection. This box held a miracle. It had to be enough to save us. The ride to the Plaza Hotel was suffocating. I sat in the back of a yellow taxi, watching the city blur past in streaks of neon rain. I should have been in a company limousine. I should have been on his arm, smiling for the cameras as the co-founder of his empire. But here I was, clutching my purse like a nervous teenager, isolated in the back seat. The doubts I had buried for months began to crawl up my throat. The late nights at the office, the scent of perfume on his collar that was too floral to be mine, the way he turned his phone screen down when I entered the room. I shook my head, forcing the thoughts away. No, we were partners. We built this life together. He was just stressed about the product launch. The plaza loomed ahead, a fortress of light and stone. Limousines were lined up 3 deep at the main entrance. Paparazzi flashed their bulbs like lightning storms, hungry for a glimpse of New York's elite. I felt small, insignificant. I paid the driver and slipped around the corner to the side entrance used by staff and private vendors. I knew the layout by heart. I used to organize these events for him before he hired an army of professional planners to replace me. I made my way through the service corridors and found the heavy velvet curtains that separated the backstage area from the grand ballroom. I put on my mask. It felt heavy on my face, a shield against the world. I took a deep breath. "You are being paranoid, Elena." I told myself, he loves you. This is just a surprise. But as I stepped through the curtain and into the periphery of the gala, the air felt wrong. It was too charged, too electric. It did not feel like a business launch. It felt like a coronation. And as I looked out at the sea of masks and diamonds, I had the sinking realization that there was no throne reserved for me. The grand ballroom of the plaza was an assault on the senses, a blinding galaxy of crystal chandeliers and gold leaf that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the air. A live symphony orchestra played something classical and expensive in the corner, but the music was barely audible over the roar of 500 wealthy guests. The air smelled of vintage champagne, orchids, and the distinct metallic scent of old money. It was the kind of room where fortunes were made and souls were sold, all to the polite clinking of baccarat crystal glasses. I drifted through the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns like a phantom. The black silk of my dress allowed me to slip into the shadows between the marble pillars, while the silver Venetian mask rendered me invisible. I was a ghost at my own husband's feast. Nobody looked twice at the woman standing alone by the velvet drapes. To them, I was just another wife, another accessory to a powerful man, easily replaced and easier to ignore. I moved closer to a cluster of BioCore junior executives standing near the ice sculpture. They were young, hungry, and already drunk on the proximity to power. "The stock is going to jump 20% by morning," one of them whispered, loosening his bow tie. "Just wait until the CEO drops the news." "This is going to be bigger than the IPO? I thought this was just a product reveal," another replied, swirling his drink. "Is it a merger?" "Better?" The first one grinned, lowering his voice. "It is legacy security. Sterling is finally locking down the future. Forget the anniversary. That is ancient history. Tonight is about the next generation." My grip tightened on the small velvet box in my clutch until the sharp edges dug into my palm. Legacy security. They were talking about business. Surely. A new patent. A breakthrough in gene therapy. I forced my feet to move, scanning the room for the man who had promised to love me until death did us part. I found him near the center of the room. Marcus looked magnificent. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his dark hair swept back with the casual arrogance of a man who owned the room. He was laughing at something a senator was saying, but his eyes were not smiling. They were darting restlessly toward the main entrance, hungry and impatient. He was not looking for me. He was not checking his watch, wondering where his wife of 10 years was. He was waiting for someone else. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. The room fell into a hush that rippled outward from the entrance like a wave. Sophia Ricci stood there. I recognized her instantly from the society pages. She was the daughter of the most ruthless venture capitalist in Italy, a woman known for her beauty and her shark-like business instincts. She was radiant in a crimson gown that clung to every curve of her body, but it was not her beauty that made the air leave my lungs. It was the swell of her stomach. She was pregnant. Undeniably, visibly pregnant. She looked to be about 5 months along. Her skin glowed with the flush of impending motherhood, a stark contrast to the pale shock I knew was spreading across my own face beneath the mask. Marcus did not just walk toward her. He gravitated to her. He abandoned the senator, abandoned his drink, and moved across the floor with an urgency I had not seen in him since we were 25 and running to catch the last subway train in Queens. But this was not love born of struggle. This was the hunger of a king claiming his prize. "Careful, my love. Easy now," I heard him say as he reached the bottom of the stairs, his voice carrying over the sudden silence of the crowd. He took her hand, treating her as if she were made of spun glass. He guided her down the last few steps with a tenderness that shattered me. I stood frozen behind a pillar, my breath trapped in a chest that felt like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press. The velvet box in my hand, the one containing the miracle I had fought so hard for, suddenly felt incredibly heavy. It felt like a stone. It felt like a punchline to a joke I was too stupid to understand. Sophia smiled at him, a look of triumph that had nothing to do with romance. And then, right there in front of the board of directors, the investors, and the entire New York elite, Marcus raised his hand and placed it firmly, possessively, on her rounded belly. He looked at the crowd, and his smile was terrifying. It was the smile of a man who believed he had conquered nature itself. He was showing off his trophy. He was showing off his heir. I scrambled backward, desperate for cover, and ducked behind a massive arrangement of fiddle leaf figs and towering white orchids near a marble pillar. My heart was not just beating, it was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird desperate to break free. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to force air into my lungs, but every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. From my vantage point in the shadows, I was dangerously close to them. I could see the sweat on Marcus's neck and the triumphant gleam in Sophia's eyes. Marcus leaned in, brushing a stray lock of hair from Sophia's forehead. The intimacy of the gesture made me physically nauseous. His voice was low, but in the acoustic perfection of the hall, it carried straight to my hiding spot. "You and the baby are all the future I need," he whispered, his eyes devouring her. "Tonight. Tonight marks the end of the waiting. Everything will officially belong to us." Before Sophia could answer, a heavy hand landed on Marcus's shoulder. It was Giovanni Ricci, Sophia's father, a man whose smile was as sharp and cold as a switchblade. He looked at Sophia's stomach not with affection, but with the appraising stare of a man looking at a vault containing gold bars. "You have done well. Sterling!" Ricci boomed jovially, though his eyes remained icy. "Just as long as my grandson arrives screaming and healthy. The $500 million investment will be signed immediately. The merger will be unstoppable." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. $500 million. That was the price tag on our marriage. Marcus was not just sleeping with her, he was not just starting a new family. He was leveraging an unborn child to close the biggest merger in the history of the company I helped him build. He had turned fatherhood into a business transaction. I was not just being replaced by a younger woman. I was being liquidated like a bad asset to make room for a more profitable acquisition. I was paralyzed, unable to move. When a group of men drifted near my hiding spot, I recognized them instantly. They were Marcus's inner circle, men who had eaten at my table and drank my wine for a decade. They stood with their backs to me, swirling their cognac. About time he cut the dead weight. One sneered, clinking his glass against another. "Elena was good for the garage days, but she is a barren relic now. A CEO needs an heir, not a roommate. I heard legal already has the papers drawn up." The other laughed, a cruel, wet sound that made my skin crawl. Citing irreconcilable differences, he is going to serve her the moment the ink dries on the Ricci deal. She will be out on the street with a settlement check before she knows what hit her. A sharp, agonizing cramp twisted in my stomach. It was not just the betrayal that brought me to my knees. It was the erasure. 10 years. I had balanced the books when we could not afford an accountant. I had charmed investors when Marcus was too socially awkward to speak. I had injected myself with hormones until my skin bruised and my veins collapsed, all to give him the family he said he wanted. And now, I was just a barren relic to be discarded for a check from an Italian tycoon. My first instinct was to run, to sprint out the side door, throw myself into a taxi, and disappear into the anonymity of the city. I wanted to curl up in a ball and let the earth swallow me whole, but then my hand brushed against my own stomach beneath the black silk. My baby. The child Marcus did not know existed, the child he would never know. A sudden, fierce heat surged through me, overriding the panic. I was not just Elena the wife anymore. I was a mother, and no one, not Marcus, not Ricci, not this room full of vultures, was going to hurt my child. I backed away slowly, retreating into the shadows of a service corridor marked Authorized Personnel Only. The heavy fire door clicked shut, muffling the music and the laughter. I leaned against the cool concrete wall, sliding down until my knees hit the floor. Hot tears streamed down my face, ruining my makeup behind the mask. But as I wiped them away, something changed. The sorrow was evaporating, burning off under the intense heat of a new emotion. It was cold. It was sharp. It was absolute hatred. I looked down the dimly lit hallway. They thought I was weak. They thought I was ignorant. They were about to learn that the useless wife knew exactly where the bodies were buried, because she was the one who had handed Marcus the shovel. The tears on my cheeks dried into a tight, sticky mask, but the sobbing had stopped. In the silence of the service corridor, the hysterical wife died, and the chief operating officer was resurrected. My mind, honed by years of managing crises and navigating hostile boardrooms, latched onto a single, glaring inconsistency. It was a detail so sharp it cut through the fog of my heartbreak. 5 years ago. That was the date etched into my memory. Marcus had been hospitalized with a severe case of adult mumps. The fever had been terrifying, but the aftermath was worse. I remembered the doctor sitting us down in his office, his face grave as he explained the complications. He had used the term orchitis and followed it with secondary infertility. He told us that Marcus's sperm count had plummeted to near zero. He had said quite clearly that the chances of natural conception were statistically non-existent. My hand drifted to my own stomach. This child growing inside me was not a happy accident. It was the result of a grueling medical intervention using frozen samples stored years before his illness. A logistical nightmare I had managed alone because Marcus could not bear to face his own biological failure. He had blocked that memory out, rewriting his history to suit his ego. But biology does not care about ego. If Sophia was pregnant naturally, as her smug performance suggested, then there was a 99% chance that the baby was not a Sterling. You are a fool. Marcus, I whispered to the empty hallway, my voice trembling not with sadness, but with the thrill of the hunt. You are such an arrogant fool. I moved. I did not walk. I stalked. I knew exactly where the VIP green room was located. I had approved the blueprints for this event layout 6 months ago. It was down the east wing, past the kitchen service entrance. I slipped through the back corridors, avoiding the cameras and the guests, moving with the efficiency of a predator. The VIP suite was unguarded. Marcus had likely pulled the security detail to the main stage to protect his precious announcement. I slipped inside and locked the door behind me. The room smelled of expensive lilies and Sophia's cloying perfume. Her belongings were scattered across the velvet chaise lounge with careless entitlement a fur stole, a diamond tennis bracelet tossed on the table, and a bright orange Hermes Birkin bag. My hands did not shake this time. I opened the bag. As the former COO, I knew that people always kept their most dangerous secrets close to them. I bypassed the lipstick and the compact mirror, digging into the side pocket until my fingers brushed against a thick envelope. It was a medical file from a private clinic in Switzerland. I pulled it out and began snapping photos with my phone, capturing every page. There were ultrasound images, vitamin prescriptions, and then, tucked at the very back, a crumpled piece of paper that looked like it had been balled up and then flattened out again. It was the result of an early amniocentesis test. I scanned the medical jargon until my eyes landed on the summary. the test had been ordered to determine paternity. Sophia must have stolen a hair sample or a toothbrush from Marcus to run the comparison. The conclusion was typed in bold, unforgiving black letters: probability of paternity, 0%, exclusion confirmed. I let out a short, sharp breath. "Got you," I hissed. I flipped to the next page. It was an email printout she had foolishly kept, a heated exchange with a man named Marco. I recognized the name. He was the personal trainer she had been photographed with in Milan last summer. The email demanded hush money for his silence regarding his son. The narrative was complete. Sophia was pregnant by her lover. She was panicking. She saw Marcus, a desperate billionaire needing an heir to secure his legacy, and she saw her father, a tycoon needing a reason to invest. She had played them both. She was selling a lie for $500 million and a wedding ring. I shoved the papers back into the envelope and placed it exactly as I had found it. A cold, terrifying calm settled over me. I was no longer the victim of a tragedy. I was the witness to a crime, and I had just found the weapon. The DNA evidence was a dagger, but I needed a nuclear bomb. I knew Marcus better than anyone. He could spin a paternity scandal. He would claim he was a victim, a man deceived by a woman he loved, and the board might forgive him for being a fool in love. But the board would never forgive him for stealing from them. I turned my eyes to the sleek, platinum-cased tablet lying on the coffee table next to Sophia's purse. It was Marcus's work device, the central nervous system of BioCore. He had left it behind in his haste to parade Sophia around, likely assuming that no one in this room would have the clearance to access it. He had forgotten that I was the one who set up the security protocols 5 years ago. I picked up the device. The screen glowed with a prompt for an administrator password. My fingers hovered over the glass. Surely, he had changed it. He must have updated it when he started erasing me from his life. I typed in the date of our first major contract signing, October 12th, 2015. The screen flashed green. Access granted. "You lazy, arrogant bastard," I whispered, a cold smile touching my lips. "You never thought I would look, did you?" I did not waste a second. I bypassed the public dashboards and dove straight into the hidden directories. I knew exactly what to look for. I searched for R&D miscellaneous, a category we used to use for speculative projects. What I found made my stomach turn. There were millions of dollars, literally millions, being siphoned out of the company accounts. The transactions were labeled as biomimetic research and European lab expansion, but the destination routing numbers led to private accounts in the Cayman Islands. I opened the detailed invoices. They were not for lab equipment. They were for a villa in Tuscany. A diamond necklace from Cartier, a custom Bentley. He was funding Sophia's lifestyle with stolen shareholder money. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive attached to my keychain. It was a habit from my days as the chief operating officer, a tool I never left home without. I plugged it into the tablet and initiated a full transfer. I copied the fraudulent ledgers, the fake invoices, and a folder of incriminating emails where he explicitly discussed hiding assets from the wife to lower his divorce settlement. While the progress bar crawled toward 100%, I pulled out my burner phone. I found the number for Luigi, the longtime personal assistant to Mr. Ricci. I typed a message that I knew would plant a seed of poisonous doubt. Investigate the timeline. The conception date does not match the father's medical records. Check the Zurich clinic files before you sign the check. I hit send just as the tablet pinged. Transfer complete. I yanked the USB drive out and dropped the tablet back onto the table exactly as I heard the heavy click of the door handle. Panic surged through me. There was no time to get back to the service door. I dove into the large walk-in coat closet near the entrance, pulling the louvered doors shut just as Sophia swept into the room. Through the slats. I held my breath. Sophia was alone. The facade of the glowing, happy mother-to-be dropped instantly. She looked annoyed. She kicked off her high heels and groaned, rubbing her lower back. She walked over to the table and picked up Marcus's personal phone, which had been buzzing with notifications. She swiped the screen to check the time, and I saw her sneer. The wallpaper was still a photo of Marcus and me from our wedding day, a PR image he likely kept to maintain the illusion of a stable family man for the investors. "Look at you," Sophia muttered to my digital face, tapping a manicured nail against the glass. "So desperate. So oblivious. Don't worry. Honey, I will help him spend your alimony." She tossed the phone back onto the sofa with a laugh, checked her makeup in the mirror, and smoothed her dress over her belly. "Showtime," she said to her reflection, then turned and strutted back out to the party. I waited 5 seconds before I slipped out of the closet. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. She thought it was showtime. She had no idea. I checked my reflection in the mirror. The woman who had arrived in tears was gone. Standing in her place was a woman armed with the truth. I had the DNA, I had the financial records, and I had a plan to turn this celebration into a televised execution. I slipped the USB drive into a hidden pocket of my dress and walked toward the door. I was ready to crash the party. I stood in front of the expansive mirror in the ladies' powder room. The silver Venetian mask, which had served as my shield for the last hour, now felt like a muzzle. I untied the silk ribbons and let it drop into the trash bin with a definitive thud. My face was pale in the harsh vanity lighting, but my eyes were burning with a cold, blue fire. I reached into my clutch and bypassed the soft, neutral gloss Marcus always insisted I wear. Instead, I pulled out a tube of matte lipstick in a shade of deep, violent crimson. I applied it with steady hands, turning my mouth into a wound, or perhaps a weapon. I smoothed my hair, straightened my spine, and looked at the woman in the glass. The devoted, invisible wife was gone. The avenging queen had taken her place. I walked back toward the ballroom, but this time I did not skulk through the service corridors. I walked through the main archway, my head held high. The click of my heels on the marble floor seemed to cut through the ambient chatter. I was wearing the same black dress, but without the mask. The context changed. I was Elena Sterling, the co-founder of this empire, and I was walking into the lion's den with a smile on my face. A hush rippled through the crowd near the bar as people began to recognize me. Whispers hissed behind fans and champagne flutes. Marcus saw me from across the room. He was laughing at a joke made by a board member, but when his eyes locked onto mine, the laughter died in his throat. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he had been physically struck. He abandoned his conversation and rushed toward me, his movements jerky and panicked, cutting a path through the confused guests. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to bruise. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I told you not to come. Go home, Elena. You are embarrassing yourself." I pulled my arm free from his grasp with a sharp jerk. I did not lower my voice. I raised it, ensuring my words carried over the soft jazz music to the circle of investors and the curious onlookers standing nearby. "I would not miss this for the world. Darling," I said, my voice dripping with sweet, poisonous honey. "I came to congratulate you. And your big surprise." The nearby guests exchanged awkward glances. Marcus looked like he wanted to strangle me right there on the parquet floor. But before he could speak, Sophia materialized at his side. She looped her arm through his, marking her territory with a possessive squeeze. Up close. Her youth was undeniable, but so was the hardness in her eyes. She looked at me with the pity one reserves for a dying animal. "You must be Elena," she said, her voice a sickly sweet soprano. "Marcus has told me so much about you. He says you are such a wonderful family woman. It is so sad that you could never give him a real family." It was a low blow, designed to cripple me publicly, but I did not flinch. I smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that did not reach my eyes. "And you must be Sophia," I replied, stepping closer until I was invading her personal space. "Marcus has told me about you too, and he also told me about the real author of that pregnancy." The air seemed to freeze between us. Sophia's smile stiffened into a rictus of panic. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, not in protection, but in guilt. Standing just a few feet away, Giovanni Ricci, who had been watching the exchange with a bored expression, suddenly narrowed his eyes. He was a shark, and he had just smelled blood in the water. He took a step closer, his heavy brows knitting together in suspicion. Marcus saw the danger instantly. He stepped between us, using his body as a shield for Sophia, and waved frantically to flag down the security team stationed by the doors. "Ignore her!" Giovanni Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "She is not herself. She has been under a lot of stress lately. She is psychologically unstable. Security, get her out of here. My wife is having a breakdown." Two large guards started moving toward us, pushing through the crowd. Marcus looked at me with a mixture of relief and fury, thinking he had won. He thought he could just drag me out the back door and silence me before I ruined his big moment. He had no idea that I was not there to make a scene. I was there to signal the executioner. The security guards grabbed my upper arms, their grip firm and professional. I did not struggle. I did not scream or try to shake them off. Instead, I stood completely still, letting my calmness contrast sharply with Marcus's frantic signaling. I locked eyes with Giovanni Ricci, who was watching the scene with the narrowed, calculating stare of a man counting cards at a high-stakes poker table. "Mr. Ricci," I said, keeping my voice level but loud enough to bridge the distance between us. "You are a legendary investor. Tell me, would you ever buy a company without doing your due diligence first?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Ricci's eyes flickered. He raised a single manicured hand in a sharp, halting motion. The gesture was small, but it commanded absolute authority. The guards froze instantly, loosening their grip on my biceps but not letting go. The older man looked from me to his daughter, and then to Marcus. The suspicion I had planted with my anonymous text message earlier was now taking root, fed by my composure and Marcus's obvious desperation. Marcus saw the shift in the room's energy. He looked terrified. He realized that if he lost Ricci, he lost everything. He grabbed a microphone from a passing stagehand, his knuckles white as he gripped the metal. "Music. We need music," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking slightly before he corrected his tone. "Everyone, please, take your seats. The presentation is starting now. Ignore her. She is unwell. She is having an episode." He grabbed Sophia's hand and practically dragged her toward the raised stage, desperate to regain control of the narrative before the whispers turned into open questions. As the crowd's attention shifted to the main platform, drawn by the sudden swell of orchestral music, I did not run for the exit. I stepped backward, fading into the deep shadows of the heavy velvet curtains that lined the side of the stage. I moved quickly to the technical booth tucked behind the scenery. Inside, Ben, the senior audio-visual technician whom I had hired 10 years ago when he was just a college intern, was manning the console. He looked at me, then at the encrypted USB drive in my hand. He knew how much I had sacrificed for this company. He knew Marcus had pushed me out. He looked at the screen where Marcus was preening, then looked back at me and nodded once. It was a silent acknowledgement of old loyalties. He stepped aside. I plugged the drive into the main terminal. The system recognized the override immediately. I synced the main projector to my manual control. Out in the ballroom, the house lights dimmed, plunging the audience into darkness. A single, brilliant spotlight cut through the gloom, illuminating Marcus and Sophia standing center stage. They looked like royalty. Sophia placed a hand on her stomach, beaming with a radiance that was as manufactured as her story. She looked out at the dark room, playing the role of the Madonna perfectly. Marcus raised the microphone, regaining his arrogance in the limelight. He looked out at the hundreds of shadowy faces, believing he had successfully navigated the storm. He believed I had been removed. He believed he had won. "Tonight," Marcus announced, his voice booming through the surround sound system with practiced gravitas. "I am not just celebrating the success of BioCore. I am here to share a personal miracle. Tonight, we welcome the future. I am proud to introduce the sole heir to the Sterling legacy." The room erupted in polite, enthusiastic applause. Sophia rubbed her belly, tilting her head lovingly toward Marcus. It was a picture-perfect moment. It was the lie they wanted to sell to the world to secure $500 million. I stood in the darkness of the wings, my face illuminated only by the blue glow of the control monitor. My finger hovered over the enter key. I could see Marcus's profile, the smug set of his jaw, the way he puffed out his chest. He thought I was gone. He thought I was powerless. I leaned close to the monitor, my heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm that felt like a war drum. "Happy anniversary, Marcus." I whispered to the dark. I pressed the key. The massive LED screen looming behind Marcus did not display the sleek, animated BioCore logo as he expected. Instead, it flickered once, violently, before settling on a high-resolution scan of a medical document dated 5 years ago. The font was large enough for the people in the back row to read without glasses. At the top, in bold, clinical letters, it read, "Diagnosis, secondary infertility. Sperm count, 0. Prognosis, natural conception, impossible." A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the ballroom. It started as a murmur in the front row and swept backward like a tidal wave. Marcus, confused by the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere, turned around. I watched his face from the shadows. The color drained from his skin so completely that he looked like a wax figure. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The microphone slipped from his sweat-slicked fingers and hit the stage floor with a deafening screech of feedback that made everyone flinch. But no one looked away from the screen. I did not give him time to recover. I hit the key for the next slide. The infertility report vanished, replaced instantly by the document I had photographed in the VIP room only 20 minutes earlier. It was the prenatal paternity test from the Swiss clinic. I had highlighted the crucial section in a jarring, blood-red box. Paternity excluded. No genetic match to Marcus Sterling. Sophia let out a piercing shriek that tore through the stunned silence. "Turn it off," she screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. "Stop it, it's a lie, someone turn it off." She scrambled backward, waving her arms frantically as if she could physically block the projection of her own deceit. But she was tiny against the 20-foot image of her betrayal. The crowd was no longer polite. They were on their feet. The shock had mutated into a frenzy. I hit the button for the third and final slide. This was the nail in the coffin. The screen filled with a spreadsheet of bank transfers. It showed a direct line of money flowing from the BioCore Research and Development Fund into a personal savings account. The beneficiary was listed clearly, Marco Rossi, Personal Training Services. The memo lines were even more damning: silence fee and child support prepayment. The ballroom erupted into chaos. The reporters, who had been dozing through the speeches, smelled blood. They rushed the stage, a phalanx of flashing lights that exploded like a thunderstorm. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing Marcus's destruction in high definition. He stood frozen center stage, a man buried under the weight of his own lies, the image of the perfect billionaire, the visionary, the family man. It all disintegrated in seconds. He looked small. He looked pathetic. Giovanni Ricci was the first to move. The shock on his face had hardened into a terrifying shade of purple. He did not look at the screen anymore. He looked at his daughter. He marched onto the stage, ignoring the security guards who were too stunned to intervene. "Papa, please, I can explain." Sophia sobbed, reaching out to him with trembling hands. "It is not what it looks like." Ricci did not let her finish. He swung his hand and slapped her across the face. The sound was a sharp, brutal crack that echoed through the microphone still lying on the floor. Sophia stumbled back, clutching her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. "Do not call me that," Ricci roared, his voice shaking with fury. "You tried to defraud me. You tried to sell me a bastard child and a bankrupt company." He turned to the crowd, to the investors, and shouted over the din of the paparazzi. "The deal is dead. There is no merger. The Ricci Group withdraws every cent." Effective immediately, Marcus finally seemed to wake up from his trance. He reached out toward the old man, desperate and pathetic. "Giovanni, wait, we can fix this." I did not know. She lied to me too, but nobody was listening to him. The flashbulbs were blinding, turning the stage into a strobing nightmare of exposure. Marcus shielded his eyes, looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped in the spotlight he had craved so much, stripped bare for the whole world to see. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom flew open with a resounding crash that cut through the cacophony like a guillotine blade. The guests, expecting perhaps a parade of waiters bearing more champagne to smooth over the disaster, turned in unison. But it was not service staff entering the room. It was a phalanx of uniformed officers, followed closely by men in the grim, gray suits of the district attorney's office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The room went deathly silent, save for the clicking of the cameras which seemed to accelerate, sensing the final act of the tragedy. I watched from the wings with a calm detachment. While I was hiding in the closet listening to Sophia mock me, I had not just been copying files to a USB drive. I had also forwarded the entire cache of evidence, the fraudulent invoices, the offshore account numbers, and the emails admitting to insider trading directly to the Department of Justice. I had hit send exactly 30 minutes ago. Justice in New York moved slowly for the poor, but for a high-profile case involving hundreds of millions of dollars in securities fraud, it moved with terrifying speed. The lead agent marched up the stairs to the stage, flashing a badge that caught the glare of the spotlight. He stepped over the microphone Marcus had dropped and stood directly in front of my husband. "Marcus Sterling," the agent announced, his voice carrying clearly to the back of the room without the need for amplification. "You are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, securities manipulation, and grand larceny." Marcus stumbled back, his hands shaking as he held them up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "No, no, this is a mistake. You do not understand. I am the CEO. I built this." "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the agent commanded, unhooking a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. As the cold metal clicked around his wrists, Marcus frantically scanned the room, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He looked past the blinding flashes of the paparazzi, past the horrified board members, and finally locked eyes with me, standing in the shadows of the stage wing. He lunged forward, restrained only by the grip of the officer. Elena, tell them this is a mistake. Why are you doing this? I am your husband." I stepped out of the shadows then. I walked slowly into the harsh white light of the stage, my heels clicking rhythmically on the wood. I stopped just out of his reach. The red lipstick I had applied felt like war paint. I looked at the man I had devoted a decade of my life to, the man who had planned to discard me like trash, and I felt absolutely nothing. You are mistaken, Marcus, I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. You stopped being my husband the moment you decided to replace me with a lie. You are just a stranger who stole from me. Marcus opened his mouth to beg, but the words died in his throat as the agent shoved him forward. To my left, another drama was unfolding. Giovanni Ricci, humiliated and enraged, had grabbed Sophia by the arm. He was not the doting grandfather-to-be anymore. He was a businessman cutting his losses. "Papa, please, it hurts," Sophia cried, stumbling in her high heels as he dragged her toward the exit. "Do not speak to me," Ricci snarled, his face twisted in disgust. "You are a disgrace. You are written out of the will as of tonight. Get out of my sight before I leave you here for the police, too," Sophia wailed, a sound of pure despair, as her dreams of being a billionaire's wife evaporated into the cold night air. The police began to lead Marcus away. He was paraded down the center aisle, the same path he had walked with such arrogance less than an hour ago. The cameras flashed relentlessly, immortalizing his downfall. As he passed the rows of shocked onlookers, he turned his head one last time to look at me. His expression was not angry anymore. It was hollow. It was the look of a man who realized he had held a diamond in his hand and traded it for a handful of colored glass. "Elena," he whispered, his voice cracking, but the officers pushed him through the doors and out of my life. As the sirens began to wail outside, the shock in the room broke. The shareholders and board members, realizing the ship was sinking, turned their eyes to the only person left standing on the stage. They swarmed toward me, their faces desperate. "Mrs. Sterling!" the chairman of the board called out, reaching for my hand. "Elena, please, you know the operations better than anyone. We can restructure. We can save the stock price if you step in as interim CEO. You are the only one who can fix this." I looked at them, the same people who had mocked me, who had whispered that I was a barren relic just moments ago. I pulled my hand away. "Fix it yourselves," I said softly. I turned my back on them and walked off the stage. The ballroom emptied slowly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the applause had ever been. The floor was littered with discarded gala programs, broken champagne flutes, and the debris of a celebration that had imploded. It looked like a battlefield, which was fitting, because I had just won a war. I did not stay to watch the janitors sweep away the ruins of Marcus's reputation. I turned my heel on the spilled wine and walked out the side exit. The night air of New York City hit me the moment I pushed through the heavy service doors. It was freezing, a biting wind that whipped my hair across my face, but I inhaled it deeply. It tasted of exhaust fumes and rain, but to me, it tasted like oxygen. For the first time in 10 years, I was not breathing through the suffocating filter of Marcus's expectations. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the loading dock. It was James, the shark of a divorce attorney I had retained weeks ago using a separate bank account my mother had opened for me. He held a thick manila envelope in his hands. "He intended to serve you these tonight," James said, his voice low and professional. His assistant handed them to me in the chaos. "It is the divorce settlement. He was offering you the townhouse and a gag order." I took the heavy envelope. I did not even open it to read the insulting terms Marcus had drafted while sleeping in my bed. I tore the packet in half, the thick paper resisting before finally ripping with a satisfying sound. I tore it again, and again, until the legal threats were nothing but confetti. I tossed them into a nearby metal trash can. "File the new paperwork, James," I said, handing him the folder I had brought with me. "Adultery, fraud, and emotional distress. I want everything. And James, make sure the restraining order is active by morning." James nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "Consider it done. Elena." As he walked away, I placed a hand on my stomach beneath the black silk of my dress. The cold wind bit at my skin, but warmth radiated from my core. This was the final twist of the knife, the secret that Marcus would never uncover. He was going to spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary. He would rot in a concrete cell, tormented by the belief that his legacy had died. He would believe he was the last of his line, a man who had built an empire only to leave nothing behind. He would never know he had a child. This baby, the miracle created from the last viable sample of his genetic material, was his. It was the heir he had been desperate for, the biological legacy he had destroyed his life to secure, but he had forfeited his right to be a father. I would raise this child alone. My son or daughter would grow up strong and kind, completely unaware of the man who had valued money over loyalty. Marcus would die thinking he was barren, while his bloodline lived on, thriving in the care of the woman he had discarded. That was my true revenge. It was not the prison sentence, it was the silence. A yellow taxi pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the gloom. I opened the door and slid onto the worn leather seat. "Where to?" Lady, the driver, asked, eyeing my gown in the rearview mirror. "Uptown," I replied softly. "Just drive." As the car pulled away, I did not look back at the Plaza Hotel. The golden lights of the venue faded into the distance, just a blurry spot in the rearview mirror. I pulled my phone from my clutch. There were 15 missed calls from Marcus's lawyer and a string of desperate, incoherent voicemails from Marcus himself. I pressed the block button without a second of hesitation. I opened a new message thread and typed a text to my mother. "I am coming home. Mom, the baby and I are fine. It is over." I hit send and let the phone drop into my lap. The taxi merged into the river of traffic flowing down Fifth Avenue. I looked out the window. The clouds had parted, revealing a vast, dark canvas of sky scattered with stars that looked like diamonds spilled on velvet. I felt a smile tug at the corners of my lips. It was not the manic grin of a victor standing over a defeated enemy. It was the quiet, steady smile of a prisoner who had just walked out of the gates. The nightmare was behind me. The city was moving forward, and for the first time in a decade, I was moving with it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Marcus's karma. Do not forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this journey with even more people.